Hello and welcome to the Tron Church podcast. For this week's podcast, we've got something a bit different, something quite special, as we're going to hear from Bob Fyall in the lead up to the republication of his book, How God Treats His Friends, which is our latest Tron Books publication. Kate Johnston, who is a member of our congregation here at the Tron and member of our Tron Books team, sat down recently with Bob to ask him a few questions about the major themes of the book. And Bob just has so much wisdom to share on the book of Job and how it works, and also on the whole area of suffering as a Christian, how we think about that rightly, how we approach that, and also how we can help and care for those who are suffering as Christians. The book will be launching this weekend and will be available to buy at all of our Tron locations on Sunday, as well as online. And you can find links of where you can buy it online on our website at tron.church/books. So here's Kate and Bob discussing how God treats his friends.
Hello, listeners. It's Kate Johnston here, and I have the great privilege of recording with Bob Fyall today. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Kate.
It's lovely to be with you here to talk about your new book. Well, it's not a new book, is it? It's a republished book from the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Tron Books is delighted to be republishing Bob's book, How God Treats His Friends, this autumn. The book is a fantastically helpful study in Job and contends with some of life's biggest questions about suffering and God's character. So in anticipation of this new release, Bob, I wonder if we might chat a little bit about some of the big themes in the book.
Yes, love to.
Perhaps I could just start by asking you, of all the books in the Bible, why did you decide to write a book on Job?
Well, I've always loved poetry. And indeed, in my early life, I was an English teacher. And when I started to study the Old Testament seriously, I was particularly attracted to poetry and narrative. And the book of Job, I always felt, was not only profound theology, but expressed in absolutely brilliantly expressive and powerful language. And I always felt I wanted to get into it and to try to understand it.
Amazing. And I notice as well, I'm saying Job and you're saying Job. Is there a...
No, Job, actually.
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, yes. I mean, in Hebrew, it'd be something more like Ayov.
Ayov, we could do that.
Something more like that. But, I mean, normally we'd say Job.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people might misunderstand it.
Yes, could confuse things. Yes. Brilliant. So the book of Job is a deep dive into Christian suffering. We see Job, a faithful follower of God. He loses everything. Why has God given us, in his word, this dramatic and at times distressing account of Job's suffering and wrestlings with God?
Well, I think, first of all, the Bible is a realistic book. It doesn't pretend that life is all wonderful. It is willing to face the huge problems, suffering, depression, death itself. And indeed, the word death occurs in every chapter in Job. You can almost say it's certainly a major theme in the book. So the Bible is determined we'll face up to the realities of life. So we're not living in some kind of cloud cuckoo land and refusing to face the big issues.
And do you think Christians ever do that, Bob?
I think Christians quite often do that. In fact, we quite often, often as Christians, we try to pretend that life is better than it is. Now, at different times, of course, life is very mixed. Sometimes there are wonderful times. You may just be about to get married. You may be about to go on a wonderful holiday. Maybe your health may be brilliant. Other times, things seem to be continually going wrong. Bereavements, illnesses, losing jobs, all these kind of things that are part of human life and part of the whole mixture of life.
And God doesn't seem to be embarrassed about having a book like this in the Bible.
No, and very far from being embarrassed. I mean, there are other parts like it, the so-called lament psalms, for example, where the psalmist is continually asking the question, why? Or the question, how long, O Lord, will I cry to you and you won't answer? remembering happier times. In Psalm 77, the psalmist says, "There used to be a time when I was singing in the night. Now you don't hear me." And there are many other psalms like that. And then there are stories of great sorrow, like Joseph, for example, and many other stories where the difficulties of life are faced.
So I suppose you've heard it here first, folks. If you didn't think there was going to be any suffering in the Christian life, that was a wrong approach to take. It can be tough, can't it?
Oh, it can be tough. And what makes it tougher for Job is that the friends have the idea that he must be a secret and dreadful sinner. It's why these things have happened to him. And that, in the book of Job, among other things, is setting out to prove that's not true.
So, as Christians, how can the book of Job help us prepare for the harder times and help us not despair?
I think, first of all, we've got to remember the book of Job is not about Job. It's about God and the mystery of his ways. In fact, in many ways, it's about creation, the mystery of creation. Why is creation, which is so beautiful and magnificent, also so terrifying and awful? Which is why in God's speeches at the end of the book, there is so much about creation. Many people think God doesn't answer Job at all. One of the things I've tried to do in that book is to show how these speeches actually do address the problem.
A really helpful point. Bob, really, really helpfully, you spend a good chunk of the book investigating how Job's friends, or so-called friends, counsel him through his despair. And the verdict isn't particularly good. Let me just quote you back to you, if that's not too strange a thing to do when you're in the room. You say, already crushed and broken, now his friends treat him as if he were already dead.
Yeah.
A person without hope and without future. Now, there is a time for silent sympathy. Sometimes when people's hearts are broken, the best thing to do is simply sit and hold their hands. But there is also a silent bankruptcy when the silence does not arise from empathy, but from having nothing helpful to say. And Bob, I think that is so profoundly helpful, and it's a really challenging point. I'm sure many of us have friends who are or who will be going through difficult trials. Maybe it is a cancer diagnosis or a miscarriage or some sort of financial disaster, to name just a few of life's many and varied trials. Mm-hmm. What can we learn from the book of Job about friending well in these hard times, and what do we say when we just don't know what to say?
I think the first thing we need to learn is we do need to learn when to speak and when not to speak. As Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. Now, the 7-day silence is far, far too long. And when they do speak, they speak from a position of superiority. I think that is the problem. Eliphaz, essentially, who's probably the oldest of the group, and he speaks from a position of knowing it all, as, his characteristic words are, as we have observed, or as I have seen. And he's not particularly giving Job any room for comfort. Interestingly, none of them offer to pray with Job.
Mm. So you've had a few years now in pastoral ministry and being amongst Christians, being part of a church family. Mm-hmm. And from that experience, what would you recommend people do if they see their friend or their church family member really up against it and they just think, I don't know what to say?
Well, once again, I can understand that. And sometimes we just don't know what to say. And if we don't, I think then we've got to show our concern in other ways. Touch is very important. Mm-hmm. Remember in Jesus' healing miracles, Jesus very often touches and speaks. Now, it's not the touch that heals. The touch is showing solidarity. It's the speaking of his powerful word that heals. But, and I think, we've got to we've got to be careful not to speak from a position of superiority. And none of us really always get it right. We've got to be prepared to realise we get it wrong. Now, none of the three friends, and certainly not Elihu, ever have any idea they might be getting it wrong.
Which must be, that's part of the devastation, I'm sure.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So perhaps even saying something like, I don't know what to say, but I love you and I'm praying for you. And
I think that is so important. And then show, I say, touch is important, kindness in whatever way is appropriate, for your particular relationship with the person. And of course, sometimes just sitting silently and letting the person speak, of course. Because, I mean, some of the things I think it's Bildad who says, Job, you're full of windy words. That's...
yeah, which, what good does that? Yeah, just...
And then Zophar in particular is so vindictive in what he has to say.
Just crushing and easy. I'm sure there'll be, myself included, it's easy to do.
It's very easy to do.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the problems of Christians is that too often we assume that because we know the gospel, because our theology is right, that everything we say in other situations is right. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Even if you don't know what to say, maybe some home baking or a little flower on the doorstep, or I
think something like that, or maybe just a card or an email or something, just to show that you're. Because one of the things about a Job-like situation is a terrible sense of loneliness. And I think, leading up to the great passage, I know that my Redeemer lived, Job talks about his loneliness, his friends don't understand him, his wife is strange to him, his family don't seem to understand him.
Heartbreak, which, and I think that you're in the pit and you are alone, and perhaps someone's been through the same thing before, and as helpful as that can be sometimes, it's only you in that situation. It's only you wrestling with God in that
That's
way.
right. And I think part of that situation is not even the specific things. Interesting, Job doesn't actually mention the tragedies that happened in chapter 1, his family, his possessions, and so on. What he talks about increasingly is this sense of being in a hostile universe. Chapter 3, a sense of being haunted by hostile presences. And no sense, and where is God? One thing that Job is never tempted to do is to become an atheist. He's got a worse problem. He's begun to fear that God is vindictive.
Yeah, which you argue in your book. God is definitely not vindictive.
No.
But when things are really hard, it can feel, why is God doing this to me? Yeah.
A book that I found very helpful in this, C.S. Lewis' A Grief Observed, which he wrote when his wife died. And there he talks about God as the cosmic sadist. And basically he says that, interesting what he says, I don't doubt that God will do his best for me. What I do doubt is that I'll like the best.
So acknowledging that there is plan and purpose behind what God is doing, but it can be a bitter...
Yes, and then Lewis says that actually the more convinced I am that God is perfect and he has a perfect plan, the less chance there is of him giving up what he's doing until the work is done.
Which I'm sure can be a painful process.
Absolutely painful,
for us. Just coming to the sort of other side of, we've thought a bit about friending and how we friend well when we don't know what to say. But on the flip side to that, we might well be going through some hard situation ourselves. And it might be like we're not enjoying particularly what our friends are saying to us, which may or may not be for a good reason. Mm-hmm. How can we decipher between the tough love of a true friend and the harsh words of an unhelpful friend?
Yes, I think, I mean, once again, there's no easy answer to that. But I think the tough love of a true friend, I think we'll be able to know when somebody genuinely cares for us, even if they don't always get it right in what they say. It's I think as I said earlier, it's not just the specific situation, it's the kind of Job-like world. It's a world where you feel there is no meaning left at all. I think I heard about somebody, who was suffering terribly. I think it was her minister said, "But Christ is risen." She says, "Yes, I know, but that doesn't make any difference." Now, I can understand that.
Hmm.
It's not it's not blasphemous or anything. It's just simply the feeling that at this moment, which is why, of course, it's very important to hold on to the certainties of faith. There's an old gospel hymn that says, "You ask me how I know he lives within my heart." That's not good enough. That's fine if my heart is rejoicing, but when my heart is broken, I need to know not he lives within my heart, but he lives and reigns in heaven and earth, even if I don't feel it at that particular moment.
Which I think that sort of comes back to in the book, earlier on in the book, you talk about the hymns that we sing
Yeah,
and how what we sing is so important, because it's not just about, we don't just sing to make us feel good.
No.
We need to sing true things. And
Yeah.
I suppose in those awful moments in life, those truths just sort of nestle deep down, don't they, if you've sung them again and again and again.
Yeah.
What might you say to Christian hymn writers right now, maybe sitting at home thinking of penning a hymn? How would you encourage them to not just focus on the?
I think one thing we're not very good at as Christians is lamenting together. We're quite good at rejoicing with those who rejoice. We're not so good as weeping with those who weep. And I think part of the problem is that since we don't have all that many hymns that help us to do that, and that's where singing some of the lament psalms, like Psalm 77 is my favourite, that it's a psalm that's meant a lot to me over the years, where we're given words to express these negative feelings. And you get in the book of Jeremiah as well. Jeremiah says, "God, you deceived me." Now, what he actually says in the Hebrew text is even more emphatic. "God, you seduced me."
Which is a strong
In other
word.
words, I've been faithful to you, but you haven't been faithful to me. Now, these words have not been edited out of the Bible. They're there to give us words when we're grieving.
It's remarkable that God allows us
Yeah,
to speak things like that.
he does indeed. And that's one of the, that is one of the great things about the gospel, which does not exist in other faiths. It's interesting, for example, in the Quran mentions Abraham and David, but Abraham didn't have concubines. David didn't sin with Bathsheba, because they've no idea of grace. The idea is that if there was as great as that, there weren't people who could have committed these sins. Now, it's a slightly different thing, but it's in the same area, that we have to hold on to God's grace. And once again, it's not a question. I think sometimes some people make us feel that if we had greater faith, it wouldn't be like this. Now, that's not true. It's not great faith, it's faith in a great God. I think that's so important, because otherwise if we try to have strong faith, we'll feel more guilty.
Yeah. but focusing again and again on the God of creation and the
That's
God of
right. The God of
salvation.
creation, the God of grace, God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah. There are times, Bob, when due to what feels like one catastrophe after the next, I've felt like a walking PR disaster for God. I felt so embarrassed in front of my friends and family who aren't Christians. I'm thinking, my goodness, my life is hardly selling Christianity. But do you think our sufferings are a hindrance to our witness? Is God embarrassed about the trials that we go through?
I don't think you could say God is embarrassed. I think God feels the suffering with us. Just as we go into the darkness, but we're never going to the darkness alone. Our suffering is never as deep as that of Jesus himself. My God, why? Now that is the ultimate lament psalm, isn't it? I mean, of course, on the cross he quotes Psalm 22, and these words, once again expressing this sense of, where are you when I need you? Rather like I think it's in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Lucy says, Aslan, where are you when we need you? It's very much in the spirit of the lament psalms and the book of Job.
So, which there can be, as we wrestle with God in these pits, there can be a real beauty to our wrestling with him that doesn't have to be a hindrance to our witness.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think I referred several times to Genesis 32, where Jacob wrestles with God. This is a mysterious stranger. Oh, it says, I will not let you go and that's Job, I'll not let you go. Job never lets go of God. And I think that's why it's so important. I remember once, a number of years ago, I was driving to a meeting and I listened to two famous preachers on the way. One of them told me to rejoice in God. I arrived at the meeting utterly depressed and feeling I was hardly a Christian at all.
Yeah.
And then on the way back, I listened to another preacher preaching one of the lament psalms. And I felt really uplifted. I felt this speaks to me, don't let go of Yahweh. Hold on to him.
Yeah. And that demonstrates something to the world, doesn't it? Seeing these people, as the world watches on, seeing these sort of unlikely groups of people in churches across the country who seem to have all sorts of strange hardships that they go through and they prepare to suffer. That must say something about our God.
Oh, I think it does.
Josh was reminding me the other day about a friend of ours who said that he knew about a particular friend in the church family who's going through something really, really awful. And he said that every time he saw her sitting there on a Sunday, it reminded him that God was true. God was like there's nothing else that could be going on inside that person to make them keep coming back to church.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is true, and that's why I think one of the Psalms talks about the sacrifice of praise. It's singing hymns of praise when you don't feel like it.
Yeah, which can be really hard.
It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it'd be good if we had more of the lament psalms as part of our repertoire. Because not that, I mean, on any given Sunday, you're going to get a whole variety of experiences. Some people will be rejoicing, others won't. It's like one of the Getty Townsend hymns I particularly like, Come People of the Risen King, it's not saying you got to keep on smiling, it's saying, come those whose joy is morning sun and those weeping through the night. Come those who tell of battles won and those struggling in the fight. That's the kind of balance we need to have.
Yeah. And it's okay to come and sing those words with tears streaming down.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the hymn, I sing because I'm happy, I sing because I'm free. Now, we'll not always be happy and free. I think it's important to sing because we believe, even if we're not happy and free.
Yeah, singing in all seasons of
Yeah.
life. Yeah. You spend a fascinating chapter focusing on the character of Elihu.
Mm-hmm.
Elihu is a confident young man, full of theology, but lacking in love. He's not a particularly difficult character to imagine, I don't think. I can kind of envisage him having a very active Twitter presence, or perhaps a propensity to blog, fill in the gaps.
He actually gives us his PhD thesis on suffering, I think.
Just what you need when you're feeling down in the dumps. So what would you say to maybe some of our younger listeners who are getting really into theology, which isn't necessarily, theology is great and a good thing, or perhaps becoming very convicted about certain theological applications, which again can be a really good thing. But what warnings are there to be found in this character?
Well, I think, first of all, he's too full of himself. About 6 times he says he was angry. Now, that is not a good basis on which to proceed. I think also there's a big difference between the kind of apologetic, the kind of theology that's theoretical, and the kind that springs from experience. I mentioned earlier C.S. Lewis is a Greek observed. Now, one of his other apologetic works, written much earlier, was The Problem of Pain. Now, that's very good apologetic. It's good arguments and so on. But the problem of pain is written from the depths of his own bitter experience. Problems of pain is more like a theological seminar. Indeed, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm the last person who's going to say we don't need theology. I've spent a great deal of my life, and still am, teaching and researching theology. It's hugely important, because if we don't have good theology, we'll have bad theology. We won't have no theology. But it's very important that we apply it to people's lives, to people's experience, and not simply be theoretical. And as I said already, because theology, in the evangelical church, we're very good on clarity, and rightly. But sometimes I think we imagine that because we've got our theology sorted out, we know more than we do. We're not very good at mystery. It's mystery all the immortal dies. Who can explore his strange design? We're not so good at that kind of thing.
Perhaps harder when you're younger, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's right. It is more difficult, and I think life teaches you lots of things which you can't otherwise learn.
I was so struck when Richard Pratt was here one year for the pastor's training course, I think, which, if you're it's connected into Cornhill, Scotland, which Bob was involved with for many years. But Richard was across and he was talking about the motivation for starting Third Mill. And I might butcher this story, Bob, so correct me if I do, but he'd been at seminary where obviously they were teaching them amazing theological skills and knowledge. And someone in the seminary had a relative who was not very well. And they asked the chaps training at breakfast one morning, right, after lectures, who can go and clean this chap up because he can't bathe himself at the moment. And I think not one person volunteered to get into the hands-on nitty-gritty. Everyone preferred the classroom reading, studying.
I know, and as a student of theology myself, I can understand that. But I think, as I say, it is experience. I don't mean by that when you're young you can't say right things or good things, but there is a necessary experience which you have to have.
Yeah, which I suppose are like our apprenticeship, where the guys come and they do Cornhill for a few days, and then they're actually in church for a few days.
Well, I think that's hugely important, and the thing is, it's got to continue as well. I mean, I realise now after all those years how little I know.
Which is a really helpful
I
thing
mean,
to be
if
reminded of.
the Lord had given me a ministry of something like 500 years, I might have managed.
Gosh, you'd be tired by the end. You need a very long sabbatical at the end of a 500 year.
No, but I mean, that's, I mean, you know, I think that's an important point, that however much you know, I mean, after all, it's going to take all eternity to, I mean, to quote C.S. Lewis again, it takes all eternity for God to utter himself completely.
So we have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot to look forward to. Well, Bob, thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom and this fantastic book. I'm so excited that Tron Books, we've got our mitts on it, and we're going to be bringing it to the world soon. I think one thing I would definitely recommend is I think it could be a great one-to-one book. So picking up and reading, if you're doing a one-to-one, the chapter sizes are so manageable. You could easily read, you could do a chapter a day. You could do it as a sort of, you know, I think we've got 10, is it 11 chapters and then a 12th chapter on preaching, or 12 chapters and a 13th chapter on preaching. So, you know, you could do it in 2 weeks, a chapter a day. Yeah, or one a month. Or.
But anyway, thank you I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you very much. And you've been very gentle in your questions.
I sometimes have been compared to the Spanish Inquisition. So that's great to know, Bob, that was fairly gentle. So good. All right. Well, look, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Run out and buy How God Treats His Friends, coming to a Tron bookshop near you soon. And Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.